Hello, welcome back to another episode of Why the Media and my thoughts on different types of media. So, for this one, I would like to talk about tier list in fighting games. So, as someone that is obviously a huge gamer, I am actually into esports and specifically watching competitive fighting games. So obviously fighting games exist, and I love the fact that people can compete in them at different levels, even from an amateur level to and to enjoying a huge professional level at like Evo. So all different fighting game tournaments have their own different game, or I should say, all different fighting games have their own different fighting scenes, is what I meant to say. So, in these different fighting scenes, a lot of people debate what characters are the best to play as. And as time went on, people decided that, hey, some characters are similar to each other in these fighting games, some characters are way different. We should list them out in tiers. And so in fighting games, we get tier lists, which are essentially, I'm going to say, the majority community agreed upon how good characters are. So, for instance, in a lot of Smash Brothers games, you could say that Mario and Link are A tier. They're some of the best, and that Pikachu could be F tier, one of the worst. So it's in these fighting games, characters are broken out into different tiers, not necessarily list one, numbered wise, but more so broken down into different parts. Even though a lot of tiers, end up with having one character being the best and one character being universally agreed upon to be the worst. So in fighting games, what makes the best character, what makes good characters, what makes bad characters? For those that don't play fighting games are actually probably more strategy based than what many people think. Obviously, when people see fighting games, they see fast-paced action, but really what makes a good character in a fighting game tends to be how well they can space. What that means is that how well, how can a character hit another character without risking themselves from being hit? So in real life, if I were to throw a punch at someone and I had long arms, I guess I would be a good spacing character because I would be able to attack someone from far away without putting myself at risk. So this is what we call spacing in fighting games, and it is one of the most important part in fighting games. It's actually also what makes the best players, or the best competitive fighting game players in the world, the best fighting game players in the world. As well as predictions are also super important in fighting games. Getting in other players' head, thinking about what the other player is going to do, and then punishing that character for making a mistake or predicting on what they were going to do. This is something, if you listen to fighting game commentary or I should say competitive fighting game commentary, you will hear people talking about reads, which are when one player essentially predicts correctly what a character does, essentially reading them like a book. And it's kind of a lot like chess in that you're thinking 1, 2, 3, 20 steps ahead into what your opponent's going to do. And another reason why some of the best players in the world are the best are movement. So spacing, predictions, and movement are what make the best players in the world. And really, in fighting games, all fighting games are different. Smash Brothers is obviously platforming. Tekken's a 3D fighting game. Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat are obviously 2D fighting games. So fighting games aren't universally the same at all in any sort of way. They have their different meters, their own different tool sets. Movement is different in all of these, but understanding how well characters do in each game is a big explanation into why a character might be a high tier. So when I think about tier lists, I actually think about my childhood. So one of the biggest games that I grew up with as a youngin was Smash Brothers for the 64, the first Super Smash Brothers. And I remember being Captain Falcon and just Falcon punching all the time. And I remember one time entering in like some elementary school tournament, and I lost almost instantly, but I literally thought I was cheating, picking Captain Falcon and just Falcon punching the whole time, because in my head that is what I thought was the strongest thing. And really, if you want to understand tier lists, you can take this as a very, very small sample size. So in my own world, I thought that because this character in this game had this specific tool, it was by far the best character, so therefore it was, a high tier character. And really, that's kind of what tier lists are. And there's actually a lot of debate whether tier lists exist. So you can look at, a fighting game and to see what all their players are playing. So I like to use Super Smash Bros. Melee as an example of this. So if you look at Super Smash Bros. Melee, which is a really, really, really deep game, has documentaries on that. It's, I believe, 18 or almost about to become 18 years old now, and people are still playing it in the millions, or at least the hundreds of thousands online. It has a huge community. This is actually the first year it's not going to be at EVO, which is the biggest fighting game tournament in the world. So, and if you look at that whole player base of what characters playing, overwhelmingly people are playing the character Fox, because it's a character that can kind of do a little bit of everything. High risk, high reward, super fast, attacks really hard, hits very hard, does a lot of damage. And even though that exists, and Fox is generally considered the best character in the game by the vast majority of the community, Fox still has his weaknesses. So this is where I think that we should come into it should be aware that tier lists might not even exist. So in this whole conversation, I want to bring up two ideas, and I think that people should understand how both of these ideas coexist and how you should kind of live in between them. So if you're really into fighting games and really care about fighting games and characters, consider this: tier lists exist and tier lists don't exist. So what I mean by this is that in Smash Brothers Melee, let's say that Fox really is the best character and that he does a little bit of everything. There can be better players in the world of a different character. So if we accept that there are better players in the character that play a different character, well, does it matter that tier list exists at all? If we look at the introspective of, the stars, and let's say, I forget, but I know the closest star to our sun is only 4 light years away, and compared to everything else, that is super close. But it doesn't really matter, because we're not going to go to that star in our lifetime, because it is still so far away, even though it is incredibly closer to us than any other star in the world. I want to compare tier lists to that, where yes, characters might appear to be the best or worse than each other, but there might be so much there's such a human factor in fighting games that it actually might not exist. The tier list might not matter at all. So one thing I want to so I have a couple examples of big fighting game characters in different tier lists in different games that I want to go upon. So a big thing is, in Melee, which I was just talking about, you have seen multiple characters see the best, and you've had phases where players were some of the best. I remember Ken, which was a notorious Marth player for probably the longest time of any player, was considered the best. And he had just a really good Marth player, and people consider Marth to be the best player. And there's still tons and tons of Marths if you look at the Melee scene. And then you had Mewtwo King, which he eventually, played Sheik. And then you had Armada, who was a Peach player but ended up dropping his main character to play Fox. And it wasn't until he switched from Peach to Fox that we saw him become the best player in the world. So this is actually one of the points where you can see an example of, hey, maybe a tier list possibly exists. But actually, as of recently, and as of, I want to say about 3 years ago, you have a character called Hungrybox, which is a Jigglypuff character, or Jigglypuff player, and he's the only Jigglypuff player in the competitive scene that is notorious, that really has results to back up that character doing well. So is it because Hungrybox is the best player in the world? Who knows? It is hard to say. In addition to this, in Smash Brothers, and this will probably be the last part where I'm talking about Smash Brothers Melee, is that about 6 years ago there was this player from Japan called Amza, and Amza played Yoshi, which was considered to be a horrible character, just due to being really awkward and having nothing going for it. Him coming to America and just destroying characters. Now, when we look at tier list, there is an important factor to consider, and that is the quote-unquote pocket or surprise character, mostly surprise character, I would say, where people in the competitive scene are so used to playing what are considered the best characters in the game that they don't realize how to fight some of the worst characters in the game, giving the worst characters the best advantage. So after this, Amza got such great results with Yoshi that even though the game was 10 years old, you saw instantly people considered Yoshi to be one of the worst characters in the game, to being actually mid-tier to mid-high tier. So when things like this in player performance happens with a new, relatively speaking, a character that hasn't performed before, we can see that the data needs to be looked at, and people consider that tier lists are almost never complete because it is basically impossible. One of the best things about joining a fighting game community, especially when a new game comes out, is creating tier lists when the game just comes out, because everybody knows that this is not what the game's quote-unquote tier list is going to look like 1 year, 10 years, 5 years down the road. A lot of times things get flipped completely on its head. An example of something against tier lists is that in Injustice 2, the Warner Brothers DC fighting game, Sonic competitive player Sonic Fox is notorious for being in other fighting games. He is considered one of, if not the best fighting game player in the world, just because he just came in number 1 or has come in top 5 in so many games and so many fighting games out there. Sonic Fox was recently in a global Injustice 2 tournament and actually won first place using the worst character in the game, Joker, and actually also used the second worst game in the character, Captain Cold. When we look at fighting games, we also need to consider that these are such unique experiences when matches happen. Obviously, everything is unique in sports and in games in general, but when a fighting game happens, no two fighting games will ever be the same. There's just so many inputs and so many different moves and so many different movements and so many different characters and stages and interactables and meters and buttons that there is billions of trillions of different combinations that fighting game matches can go about. And so this is kind of the example when I come about that this gives room for players to come about and break about and show that skill is absolutely the most important factor. Also, coming into talking about the wild card, I was doing research on Rang Chu, who is a famous Tekken player, was considered about the third or second, or I would say actually the third or fourth best Tekken player for years and years and years. Or not years and years, but for a while, considered one of the worst characters in the game, and actually ended up winning a global tournament using the worst character, or one of the worst characters in the game, Panda, because it was considered that everyone was prepared for a different type of character through different top players. So this is another example of, a wild card, and I think this is probably the most raw wild card that I can come to an example about. So when I think about tier lists, I honestly think that we should view them in kind of two ways. I think we should view them as kind of Amazon reviews, to where, like Amazon reviews, to where, oh, this, 4 stars, Fox, always reliable, has good, up there, can get those kills and whatnot. And, even though this might be a 4 or 5 star review, it might be a terrible product for you personally, or this bad product actually might just really work for you. It might just have had, fluke reviews. I also think that why I also love tier lists, and what we should also kind of really look them at, is kind of snapshots into what the fighting game was like when this tier list was made. So obviously, when you go to a lot of these tournaments, the top play, all the players are used in the top characters of the game, typically speaking. Not all the time, but typically speaking. So when you look at these tier lists, you can say that, oh, if this tier list was made in this year, we can see that people were playing these characters, and that during this time, maybe these lower characters weren't considered on there. They were either not used that often, or they were potentially more wild cards or undiscovered characters. So I think there is obviously an example, or there is an argument out there for why tier lists exist and why they don't. I think it is a case-by-case thing. I don't think you can say the tier lists exist, and I don't think you can say tier lists don't exist at the same time. I think when a fighting game is more complex and has a bigger player base, it is impossible essentially to come up with a tier list. Not to say that some characters might have better tools on paper than other characters, but we can also look at other games and be like, oh, these are so simple. Well, of course, this character is the best character in the game, and there might not really be a point into playing a different character in this game. So my only conclusion that I really want to say in this is that I'm really happy that tier lists exist, because they're really a definitive part of being part of a competitive video game environment, or being part of a competitive video game community. So when people talk about specific characters, specific communities, there are so many references to their tier list placements or tier lists, and they're just a really fun part into getting involved in those communities. There are even I would like to shout out Zoo Tier List, which is a YouTube channel dedicated to making tier lists for animals in the wild, which is a great satirical comedy YouTube channel, and that is kind of just a great snapshot into how gamers view tier lists. So, in all, I'm very happy they exist. I understand why tier lists make people upset or why people live or die behind them. There's absolutely arguments for everything, but in the end, I am just, like I said, happy they exist, and I am always looking forward to seeing what people are saying about different fighting games I am interested in.